So we're going to be fixing the stress crack today. I drywalled this basement in, I would like to say June. Um, so it's been, I don't know, 5 or 6 months now, and there's a stress crack. Now it's cracked right where there's a structural beam with a post. So that's how we kind of know it's a stress crack. So the things you'll need is some type of quickset compound. I'll be using two. Sheetrock 45 for the first two coats, Drywall 90 for the pre-filling, all-purpose for the final coat, a bucket of water to clean the knives and pan, a 10-inch knife, a 12-inch knife, and your taping knife. For me it's a 6-inch. You want your tape, so I'll be using the fiber fuse, and optional you can use a heat gun. I will be using that just to be in and out of this project quickly. Also, you want to be using drop sheets to cover the floor. You don't want to be a slob, and using the drop sheets will make cleanup nice and easy. So the first thing you want to do is cut the crack into a V using a utility knife with a sharp blade. And what this does is it gives you lots of room to pack your quick setting compound in there. You also want to get rid of any loose debris in there, so just use your hand and kind of just clean out the V groove. And this just assures that your quick set bonds directly to the drywall. So this is what it should look like after you V-grooved it. You also want to make sure that there's no movement. So I just quickly checked with my finger pushing on it, and there was no movement, so there's no need for screws. Although if you want to be safe, you can always add screws if there's a 2x4 on the other side of the drywall. So once the V-groove's done, you want to take a quick set and work it into the V-groove. Make sure you push on it to multiple passes if you have to. You want to make sure you fill up the entire V-groove with as much quick set as possible, especially since this was a stress crack caused by I don't know, either the structural beam, settling, or the post settling. Yeah, because this cracked right through the drywall. There was no seam here. I'm positive the seam on the ceiling was a seam, but the crack you see on the wall itself, the crack actually cracked through the drywall. So you want to make sure you pack it in there so you don't have to come back and fix it again. And so this is what it should look like after the pre-filling's done. You essentially just want to fill the V-groove, and that's about it. You don't want no build-up on the drywall itself. So now we're going to tape it with fiber fuse. You can use fiber fuse or mesh tape. I'm not a big fan of the paper, just because the fiber fuse or mesh, lets air through so it dries properly. So for first cut, we're going to use the 10-inch knife, and you just want to put your knife on the center of the tape and see how bad it rocks back and forth, so you know how much fill you're going to need to make sure it's flat. So you want to make sure your coats are nice and clean, whether it's first, second, or third. And essentially the way I look at it, you want your first coat to look like your third coat. So this is second coat, so we're going to use a 12-inch knife. And again, you want your second coat to look nice and clean. As I mentioned before, you kind of want your coats to look like final. But you also don't want to overwork it, because if you overwork it, it's going to want to peel itself off the wall. So you just want to find that sweet spot where you're able to get it nice and clean without peeling it off the wall. Alright, so now we're going to put third coat on, but first we're just going to scrape off any high spots. As you can see, I took my 12-inch knife, made sure it was still flat, and we're essentially just going to skim coat over top of this with all-purpose. That way it sands nicely. So this is what this should look like after third coat. We're going to give it a full day to dry before we sand and paint it. Alright, so we're going to start sanding the patch. You want to make sure you have a light. I use my Milwaukee lights because all my batteries are Milwaukee. And then you also want to have a sandpaper or sand block, at least 120 grit or higher. Anything lower than that, you'll see scratches after you paint it. And you want to hold the light on an angle, and this will show you any imperfections. And then after that, you still want to run your hand across the patch to make sure it's nice and smooth. So now that the sanding is done, you want to make sure you prime your patch. If you just use paint and primer, the stuff that's all in one, what will actually happen is your patch will flash through the paint. So that's why you want to prime it first with just primer. But I like to put 2 coats of primer over top of it. Now that the primer is dry, you want to put your 2 coats of paint on. You always want to do your cut-ins first, and then roll your patch. So now that the patch is done, you can roll up your drop sheets, and obviously dust will get in between the drop sheet and the wall. So you want to make sure you vacuum all that dust up. If you use a broom, you can use a broom, but I'd rather use a vacuum. It contains the dust and doesn't spread it everywhere. And just like that, you'll never know there was a crack there.